Welcome back. Now, moving on to a story that has been many, many years in the making. Now, the NPA says that 64 new cases have been registered for investigation, and these emanating from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The TRC was, of course, a court-like body that the democratic South African government had established in 1995. Now, the aim was to deal with and reconcile the country and its people by essentially uncovering the truth about human rights violations that had occurred during the apartheid era. Now, the NPA says that 25 prosecutors and 40 investigators have been dealing specifically with TRC Matters. And advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza has also been appointed to review the measures to deal with and prosecute those involved in these cases. So to discuss these latest developments, we joined in studio by author and nephew of Ahmed Timol, Imtiaz Cajee, journalist, author and son of Fort Calata, Lukhanyo Calata, and Dr Marjorie Jobson, who's a director at the Khulumani Support group, join us via Zoom. And gentlemen and Dr Jobson, thank you so much for joining us here on Morning Live today. Let me start with you, Imtiaz. If we look at how things have developed since the conclusion of the TRC, and I think it must be said that all three of our guests this morning have been very instrumental in terms of keeping the story alive and making sure that justice in some form does actually accrue to the victims. But last week, we heard of the death of the former Minister of Law and Order under apartheid, Adrian Vlok. We know in your own case, in the inquest into the death of your uncle, Ahmed Timol, the police officer, João Rodrigues, for example, has now passed away. What is your take on the latest developments with regard to what the NPA has embarked on?
Look, Sakina, it's been a very, very painful journey. Since 2003, when the final TRC reports were handed over, the onus was on the government of the day to follow up on all those so-called 300 cases. Rest assured, there were many, many more cases. And the reality is very little had transpired. We heard in mid-2000s about the so-called political interference from the executive at that particular time. In 2008, 2009, the backdoor amnesty that was proposed by government was dismissed by Judge Lukhanyo. And in 2017, only the first reopened inquest took place in a democratic South Africa. And again, none of these events have ever happened on its own. The onus has been on us as families to continue mounting pressure. And that is why the Timol inquest was reopened in 2017. The latest developments, welcome, most certainly, but long, long overdue. Because the reality is that many, many apartheid era perpetrators have passed on. Key witnesses amongst families have passed on. Sakina, we still face the reality where apartheid era records remain classified in a democratic South Africa. So even when we conduct these reinvestigations, these inquests, we don't have a full picture because those records are sitting under an ANC-led government in their archives that we don't have access to. We have a situation where ANC-led government has reappointed a number of apartheid-era police officers to investigate the crimes committed by their own regime. But despite all these challenges that we face, I think the overwhelming majority of families still support the notion of these cases moving forward. We've got no choice. Our hands are tied. And that is why we work with the system, we work with the processes. We keep an eye on it, because we want families to have their cases heard. Where evidence exists, we are not asking for much. We are asking for our matters to be investigated, where evidence exists for perpetrators to be prosecuted, and for families to get answers, to get closure. The Nokutula Similani matter, Sakina. The family opened the case in 1996. It was still called the John Foster Square Police Station. Till today, that case has not started. Nokutula Similani's mom sits in Bethel in Mpumalanga, waiting for this matter to be heard. And perpetrators are passing on. And you can be rest assured, apartheid-era structures and covert systems that they had are not asleep. They continue working. And the painful reality is, within government, they remain doorkeepers of apartheid-era records. But ultimately, we support the process. We want answers. And we don't have any choices but to support the system. And that is why we as the Apartheid Era Victims Family Group have been engaging with the NPA, working with the NPA, working with the investigators from the DPCI, prosecutors from the NPA, to say our matters are here. What do you need from us to ensure that these cases move forward?
Mm-hmm. So let me bring Lukhanyo Calata in. Lukhanyo, same question to you, but in addition to that, does it give you some form of comfort that Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza has now also been appointed to kind of track and oversee what is being done by the prosecutors and investigators who've been appointed?
Sakina, good morning. Yes, I do believe that the appointment of Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza is a step in the right direction with regards to, TRC matters. Ultimately, we would have preferred it if the Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamula, had made this an open inquiry so that anybody who has got evidence could bring that evidence before that inquiry or commission, so that the commission itself is binding, is able to subpoena individuals. For instance, we know that at the time when the TRC handed over its 300 plus cases to the government at the time, President Thabo Mbeki was in office at the time. So what did he know about the suppression of TRC investigations and prosecutions? So under an inquiry, we, believe that someone like President Thabo Mbeki would have been subpoenaed to come and answer about what he knew and understood. But although, like I say, Sakina, we support this appointment of Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, we're not sure as to whether or not he would have the powers to subpoena someone like former President Thabo Mbeki or even former President Jacob Zuma. Remember that between 2003 and 2017, nothing really happened with regard to any TRC-related matters. And these two gentlemen that I have mentioned were presidents of this republic. We're talking about former ministers of justice, someone like Bridget Mabandla. What did she know, for instance, as per the affidavit by the former NDPP, Uvusi Pikoli? What did someone like Michael Masuta know, for instance, about the suppression of these TRC cases? So, yes, we completely approve of Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza's appointment because, he knows the cases, he knows the families, he's familiar with all of these matters. But I must say, Sakina, that we would have preferred, an inquiry that's open to the public in this regard.
Dr. Marjorie Jobson, the Khulumani Support Group, of course, also, trying for many years to have some form of justice brought to the victims. And just, when I think back, I think when I started at Metro FM and ever since, we've had these running discussions with yourselves over the years. I think that was around 2006. And it seems as though we keep having the same discussion year after year, at one point to the next. But what's your assessment, Dr. Jobson? And also, if you could just give us a sense of what's been happening with some of the victims and, what sort of benefits have accrued to them over the years.
Good morning, Sakina and fellow interviewees. I'm grateful for this opportunity. We've known Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza many, many years, from the time that he was head of the investigations committee of the Truth Commission, and we worked closely with him in our international lawsuit. So it's a long-standing relationship. We know that he helped with the opening of the Section 29 investigations to the public, the reports that are now lodged in the South African History Archive. So I think for us, the issue is we are not going to solve this unless we deal with the issues that remain the so-called unfinished business in a more holistic manner, in a manner in which there's a real partnership between victims and the authorities. I'm grateful that the NPA has reached this point of dedicating people. We would like to have a role also, as Lukhanyo said, in knowing if these are investigators that can be trusted, but at least there is a little bit of progress on that front. What we're very concerned about is the evidence that has emerged that even before the Truth TRC unit was set up, there were top-level decisions that only the 17,000 people who managed to get recognized by the TRC, whose evidence that they presented in their statements and in their hearings was corroborated, are the only people that even this commission is going to serve, the families of the victims. So that is a major stumbling block. And if we are really going to serve justice to this country for the future, to heal this trauma that has never been addressed, it needs to be a process that actually looks also at validating all the records. I mean, we have 130,000 records of the victims and what happened to them. TRC only validated 17,000. So there's a very big disproportion there. It's somewhat easier to simply deal with the limited number. There were originally 300. We're wondering what happened to the all the files that were handed over by Advocate Ntsebeza to the NPA. That's another mystery that has never been solved. But we think that there has to be an equal justice, equal attention to that issue, and equal attention to the reparations issue, because we are losing ground on this issue. We know that in 2000 there was an order from the top of the leadership of the country that only the TRC cases would ever be attended to. That has excluded about 100,000 people from any benefit of justice. That is a wound that is going to be transgenerational if we don't deal with it now. That's why you keep getting these sleep-ins at the Constitutional Court. All over the country, we are called every single week about this matter. And so I would say, yes, we support this. We would like to have relationships with the investigators. Imtiaz is doing remarkable work in this regard, but we also need to see that, we're not going to be left behind globally. The Office of the President of the DRC has now been in contact with Khulumani because they have decided to compensate 6 million women rape survivors of the militias and the soldiers in the DRC. And I've been meeting with delegations from the Office of the President of South Sudan on a similar issue, because there was this impression that South Africa solved the problem. We are far from solving the problem. I mean, I've been having to share a lot of the knowledge we have acquired about how do you provide equal justice after these situations of very terrible conflict and abuse. So we think it's a beginning, an opening of a window, but the window needs to be really start to address the picture in a much more holistic way.
So looking at the way forward, Imtiaz, of course, a lot of time has been lost. Evidence, as you guys have pointed out, witnesses have passed on. But of course, there is an opportunity now to at least address some of it. But of course, the investigators, that issue, the mistrust in some of the investigators who were part of the apartheid era system, has that been addressed sufficiently?
Well, Sakina, if you remember, we discussed this.
Yes.
When the SCA dismissed the 342 application of João Rodrigues. And I raised my concerns. And those are questions that history will judge as ANC government with, Sakina. And how do you allow apartheid-era police officers back into the system? But as far as we are concerned, we don't have any choices. And that is why we've taken the initiative to engage with the NPA and the DPCI, to work with the investigators and prosecutors directly, to sit with them across the table to make sure we get regular feedbacks. We don't have any other options and alternatives. We are totally dependent on them. And that is why we continue monitoring them.
But I'm just curious, Lukhanyo, Dr. Jobson, you can also chime in if you wish. But what happens in an instance where there is a case and, this particular investigator is perhaps known to have been linked to it, be it directly or indirectly. How do you then proceed in that matter?
Imtiaz had a case like that, Sakina, and I'm sure that he can explain that to you. Where let me not talk. I think let me hand it over to Imtiaz, and then he can give you a first-hand account of how he dealt with the matter.
So it's already happened.
No, most certainly it has happened. And, you know, if I can share with you, I mean, some of the anecdotes, Sakina, you know, it's devastating. In one of the meetings that we had going back to 2018, this former security branch police officer chairs this particular meeting, and he makes jokes about the 10th floor. He makes jokes about the 10th floor. So I've been raising my objections since 2018 when we set up task teams to deal with these matters. And I said it with the greatest of respect, that you cannot allow apartheid-era police officers to be brought back into the system, to go back to victims, to go back to the wives of the Craddock Four and say, we're busy investigating the deaths of your husband. I raised it consistently, and I was obviously called a racist. So these are the challenges that we have, Sakina. And that is why we've engaged on this process to work with the system, not because we openly support it. And the reality is, we can go back to the history of the TRC, we can go back to post-TRC, and as Lukhanyo has indicated, history will judge this ANC government as to what did they do post-TRC, not only with post-TRC prosecutions, but in totality with the TRC recommendations. That is the question. And obviously you can understand why this ANC-led government today don't want to talk about these matters. And that is precisely why, Sakina, when it was the 50th commemorations for my late uncle, I did not participate in those celebrations. I wrote a letter to the president of this country, and I said, the De Klerk Foundation issued a press release talking about deals and negotiations, and can you share with us in the country, because you were busy with Rolf Meyer, tell us what transpired. Was there a political settlement? Was there a political deal? So this government is not interested. They are quick during elections to start telling us and celebrating and commemorating the anniversaries of our loved ones. But they will not speak and ask and say, but where are the perpetrators? And that, for me, is my focus. And that is why I am personally vindicated, because I can tell you, the events that unfolded in my life after the 2017 inquest, Sakina. During the inquest, there were numbers in droves supporting me. But when I started pursuing João Rodrigues vigorously, putting pressure on the NPA, I'm a counter-revolutionary. I don't know anything about the struggle. I'm now creating problems for people, because I wanted João Rodrigues to sit in a criminal trial and to be charged. And never forgetting, when you speak about Adrian Flock, Sakina, I reached out on numerous occasions to Rodrigues and his legal counsel. I said, I'm giving you a window of opportunity. And for that, we must commend Judge Billy Motley during the inquest, Judge Monama, who was presiding over the criminal trial, reaching out consistently. So when they tell us we must forgive, who do we forgive? The comrades who are in the trenches are very happy today. Very happy today. That is why they don't want to support us. They don't want to preserve the legacies of their loved ones, because we are saying, yes, preserve legacy is very important, to make sure that we understand the sacrifices, to make sure that today we make the right choices. Our loved ones did not die so that their comrades can come into power and get tenders, and for them to fight each other in the courts of law in a democratic South Africa. That's not what our loved ones died for. They died for a better life for all South Africans. And the question is, again, I would say, history will judge this ANC-led government, post-2003, specifically for us as families. What did you do? And on that basis, Sakina, welcome the decision, because we don't have choices. We have trust in Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza. He had his own issues at the TRC. He was set up at the TRC during the TRC process because he was a problem. So under the circumstances, we've got to take what's coming. We've got to work with the system. But we are not fooled. That you can be rest assured. And history has proven that when we stand together and we fight, we will succeed.
Time is against us. Lukhanyo, quickly from your side, what's the way forward? And then from Dr. Marjorie Jobson, just a very quick one with regard to the reparations issue. Let me start with Dr. Jobson and I'll end with you, Lukhanyo.
Sakina, it is my conviction that until this government actually acknowledges that yes, all Black people were victims of apartheid, but there were particular people who were community activists who spent years protecting their communities, being killed, tortured, detained for indefinite periods. Those people qualify in terms of human rights law and in terms of what the TRC published as its proposals for settling these matters. These matters are far from being settled, and this is a wound that only gets transmitted across generations that we can deal with. So I pray that this is a beginning of a new understanding of the government, that we are not against them. We have all the information they need to properly solve these issues. Thank you.
Lukhanyo?
Sakina, thank you so much. So I think I want to just echo what Imtiaz has been saying, that it's important for us to get to the truth around what happened to our loved ones and why their murders were never investigated. It's very important that we find out who within the African National Congress sold out the blood and the lives of our fathers. So this process that Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza is going to lead is crucial. And we as the families, we stand ready to support him. We need to find out who sold out our brothers, our sisters, our fathers, and our mothers. We need to find out who within the African National Congress did that. And those people clearly were acting against the law, they were acting against the Constitution, and we therefore need them to be held accountable, because in this country, justice is a pillar. And we need to make sure that we live in a country where there's rule of law. So anybody within the African National Congress that negotiated illegal deals with former apartheid leaders, not to prosecute them for their crimes that they committed against our humanity, those people need to be held accountable because they did not do so with our mandate. They did not do so with the okay from the families.
Well, thank you so much to our guest this morning, author and nephew of Ahmed Timol, Imtiaz Cajee, journalist and author and son of Fort Calata, Lukhanyo Calata, as well as Dr. Marjorie Jobson, director at the Khulumani Support Group, joining us to talk about the new registered cases for investigation emanating from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as well as the appointment of investigators and prosecutors by the NPA to tackle the TRC matters. And of course, we'll keep a beady eye on these developments.